Hello and welcome to PropNext, the property podcast about all things related to the future of real estate. I'm delighted that you've joined me today. My name is Gavin Morgan, your host. If you'd like to know a little bit more about me, please check out www.propnext.com. That's propnx.com. Or drop me a line if you'd like to chat privately on gavinrmorgan@propnext.com. That's GAVINRMORGAN@propnext.com.
This is Sam Whiffin from Eaton Square Capital. Thank you very much for joining the PropNext podcast.
Absolute pleasure, Gavin. Thank you for having me, and always a delight to talk to JLL alumni.
And likewise, Sam, I was going to say a real honor to have a very esteemed member of the JLL alum, particularly in Hong Kong, on today, and talk about something completely different, which is interesting too. The Vancouver metro market. And I mean, Sam, maybe you could, just before we get into that, would you mind just giving a little introduction to yourself, please, before we sort of crack on with the topic in hand?
Yes, Gavin, with pleasure. I mean, at a high level, 20 years in Hong Kong, 17 of which were with Jones Lang LaSalle. Very, very happy years. And I was mainly in the commercial markets there, in Hong Kong and in the region. And then emigrated to Vancouver with the family in 2003. And since coming to Vancouver, very much been involved with residential as opposed to commercial. And really kind of focused on luxury property in Metro Vancouver, and in particular, single family homes. So during the last 20 years, I've mainly been in the building business, but also had a lending business that lent against prime residential property. So I've seen a number of different aspects of it, and also been witness to the incredible development of the Vancouver market.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to have been one of the fastest developing markets in North America for the last 10 or 20 years. And I mean, Sam, one of my first questions for you was going to be what initially attracted you to single family homes in Vancouver. I mean, I'm guessing it's probably a little bit of that, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit, please.
Yeah, with pleasure. Well, when we first arrived here, we'd been going to Whistler for many years. We'd had a place there, but then moved down to Vancouver. So I started to have a good look around at what I wanted to do in the property world. And I just saw this luxury, this residential market as a whole that had very limited land supply, constricted by the ocean and the mountains. And it reminded me quite a bit of Hong Kong, actually, in that respect.
Nice.
I also saw, I mean, as you would well recall. So that was a kind of a fundamental thing, and then I saw that there was a huge amount of inward migration. I mean, Vancouver is acknowledged as one of the best places to live in the world, and we've got significant growth in the likes of tech. Google, Microsoft expanding very rapidly here. We're a world center for mining and raising capital around the mining industry. And we're also sometimes called Hollywood North. So, a huge amount of film work that's done up here. And so I just thought, well, okay, so, we've got limited land supply, we've got continuous inward migration. And then the third thing was that we've got very diverse sources of wealth. So, we're a multi-ethnic city. And we've got our, Chinese community, our Indian community, Iranian community, not to mention a very well-established European expat community and a very strong Canadian community. So, all of these sort of tribes, if you like, have got, substantial wealth. So it really sort of starts to speak to affordability. So it's really those three things, Gavin. I think, limited land supply, inward migration, and affordability. That I just thought was, a really good kind of cocktail, if you like.
No, indeed. And during the time that I spent in Asia, I mean, it was a constant talking point. I mean, it's extremely popular with wealthy Asia-based and sort of Asian natives as well. And, it bears out what you're saying about the dynamic of the population base there. As much, I mean, Sam, you've been there, as you've mentioned, for quite a while. What are the big changes that you've seen in the sector that you're focusing on since you entered it?
Yeah, well, Gavin, I mean, I think, it's been a sort of a market which has seen incredible growth, right? And that sort of growth can be seen in a number of elements. To start with, end values. Okay, that's the first thing that you look at. Prices have doubled in the last 10 years, certainly, and in some cases even tripled if you're looking at sort of things like prime apartments downtown. So a real ramp up of end values. We've seen that tail off a bit with interest rates and the pandemic, but it was more a leveling off, which now seems to be starting to move. Values seem to be starting to trend upwards again with very limited inventory. So, huge growth in end values, but also a very significant growth in cost. When I first started building single family homes, we were looking at something like 350 Canadian dollars, hard and soft costs. So that's the actual building costs plus the cost of the architect, permits, financing, etc. And if you look at that number today, it's more like $750 a square foot.
Wow!
And that's for a good quality single family home, but basically double.
Yeah, a big increase. And and Sam, are you seeing that? I'm down here in New York, as you know, and it seems to be tipping off a little bit in the other direction now. Is that something you're witnessing in Vancouver now as well, or are costs holding firm?
Very much so, Gavin. We've had this wild ride during the pandemic where for example, we saw costs of lumber quadruple and then halve. So, we're still twice as much as they were 5 years back, but it's starting to ease a bit more now. So I would agree with you. I think the overall trend is for materials costs are starting to come back a bit. There's still a huge demand for quality labor. So we're not actually seeing that side of it ease too much. But I would say in the round, the whole construction process, cost-wise, is starting to calm down.
And Sam, look, that's really interesting. An obvious question then, I think, is with rates rising and costs coming down, tapering a little bit. Do you think that will help the market keep volumes up, but will it impact pricing in a downward direction, or do you see that playing out a little differently over the coming year or two?
Yeah, well, we've got a number of factors that are sort of pushing and pulling the market. If we talk about interest rates, obviously that goes directly to affordability. But we have had the famous stress tests that have been utilized by the banks over the last 5 or so years. So actually, these higher interest rates seem to be being digested by the market. And the stress tests seem to have done their job. People actually can afford to pay 6.5%, 7% for their mortgage. So, that's kind of some good news that it hasn't impacted the market as much as it might have done. But what it has done is caused a number of people to just stay where they are, not to sell and buy another house because they might have a 5-year fixed mortgage in place. Yeah. At below 2%. So that's restricting inventory, which is another factor.
And Sam, just leading right into working from home, which again down in the suburbs here around New York, has really driven a lot of demand, for suburban housing that would appear to be going to stick, i.e., I don't think there will be a similar migration back to the city when we're well past any threat of COVID. And that, of course, supports not just existing values, but future value growth in markets like this. Similar story in Vancouver?
Gavin, I think a very similar story in Vancouver. I mean, when the pandemic hit, it caused a lot of relocation to the more remote areas of BC, which there are many beautiful areas. So it was quite an enticing formula. And everybody had to work from home, so everybody could work from home. But again, as with other major cities around the world, we're seeing a rebalancing and a gradual return to the workplace, which has been happening for probably 12, 15 months. That said, it's never going to go back to the situation we had before the pandemic. So, this working from home has entrenched itself. Employers look at it, certainly in our part of the world, where we have more of those, more of the businesses that I was talking to you about. So more sort of, tech, film, more diverse businesses, as opposed to a major financial center where, the bigger banks, the Goldman Sachs and Chases are being more strict in terms of how they mandate a return to work. Mm-hmm. So I think that, we're seeing a renewed interest in moving back towards the city. I mean, I would say that suburban single-family homes in Greater Vancouver have remained in demand throughout, the last 5 years. I think they'll always be well supported by the buyer community.
Yeah, it's reassuring to hear you say that. I mean, that's how as I've said, that's how I see it too. And I also think, and I think this is kind of coming through in what you're saying, so I still think it supports continued investment in these types of communities as well, as they continue to develop forward, as we just discussed. Sam, you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you mentioned Whistler, which I'm ashamed to say that I've yet to visit, having been skiing in other places in Canada, and I've only ever heard great things from anyone that I know that's been there. Was that hard hit or badly affected by the pandemic? What's happening up there?
Well, great question, Gavin, and I look forward to you visiting Whistler hopefully in the not too distant future. Well worth a visit.
That was almost an invitation, Sam, so I might just follow up with you on that.
Yes, I think you read that one right. Absolutely, it'd be great to see you. So look, the last few years have had an incredible impact on Whistler. It's been an incredibly positive impact. I mean, during the pandemic, it was almost literally a case of head for the mountains. People wanted to be away from cities, and Whistler offered this opportunity to have a great lifestyle. So, the pandemic was on, but you could still go skiing in the winter and you could still go golfing in the summer. So there was a huge increase in demand, and that increase in demand was put onto a market that had extremely limited inventory levels. So, net result, prices have increased in Whistler nearly 50% in the last 3 or 4 years, and there is virtually nothing for sale. It's been been amazing, actually. I mean, it's taken everybody by surprise.
Yeah, and it's also still attracting a big international demand. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people from around the world go there particularly for winter sports. I'm sure it's growing as a summer sports destination as well. But from an investment point of view, you're still getting the same dynamic of investor, or is it more domestically focused these days? Has anything changed there?
I think it's still a very sort of widely held ownership base up in Whistler. You've got people from all over, expats from Asia, still very much a feature. Vancouver residents who, keen to have a ski chalet an hour and a half away from town. A lot of US buyers who are looking at places like Aspen, and Whistler still looks cheap compared to somewhere like
Yeah.
So I think, again, it's a diverse group of owners, and still, and there's been an incredibly well-ordered market. But what we've seen, Gavin, in the last sort of couple of years is that there's been a real tick up in demand for these sort of trophy properties. And,
Yes.
$10-15 million Canadian used to be a crazy amount of money for a house in Whistler. Well, not anymore. It's fairly usual to see those sorts of prices achieved.
Sam, that's a really interesting kind of sort of little subset of the residential market that I wanted to talk to you about, because similarly, I mean, I've noticed in suburban markets that the really good stuff, ocean views, there still seems to be very strong demand for that in suburban markets, the real ultra prime stuff. But in big cities, as we both know, the ultra prime apartments, they seem to have wobbled a little bit in the last sort of 5 years with a bit of a challenge to pricing and certainly weakening demand. Vancouver and Whistler, I mean, you just talked about Whistler, and it sounds like ultra prime is still in high demand there. What's the story down in Vancouver? Is that still strong as ever, or is it wavering a little as it has in many other cities around the world?
Yeah, interesting. Really, really interesting. So I think, as far as some of the very large apartments, condos in downtown Vancouver, I mean, we've seen one that's come on the market, 7,000 square feet, $26 million asking price. No real outdoor area, wonderful views, and an absolutely, prime location. But that's going to have a much more limited audience, and compared to the single family home market. So for example, there, just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen 3 lots that are next door to each other, very prime area downtown Vancouver called Point Grey. These 3 lots, they total 5 acres, and there's nothing built on them. It's just bare land. And these are just sold to a single buyer for 50 million Canadian. And, that got everybody's attention for good reason.
Indeed, yeah.
And they sold within about 3 months. So, as we've had this sort of inward migration of these high net worth individuals into Vancouver, so the appetite for this type of thing has really increased. And I just heard end of last week the rumors of a 4-acre piece, waterfront compound with 3 iconic houses on it, possibly coming to the market with a price tag of $100 million.
Wow.
And nobody's saying they're absolutely nuts. Everybody's curious, but nobody's saying that price is absolutely nuts. So, we talked about change. Well, that sure is, just unheard of, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's very strong pricing by the standards of any major market. And Sam, where do you think the market settles in that respect? Do you see, I mean, you've talked about there's been a big uplift in not just costs, but obviously values the last decade plus. Looking ahead, do you think it powers on, or do you think it stabilizes a little bit?
Well, I think we're going to have to see, what happens as restricted inventory eases, because there's no question the sort of prices that we're seeing at the moment will encourage more people to list their properties. So I think for me, the key is just to see volume of sales increase and prices to remain stable at these elevated levels. That will enable the market to bed down after all of these sort of major events that have happened, COVID, interest rates, etc. And once, if that's the case, and even if prices ease off a bit, I would suspect it would be by a relatively small amount. I mean, they did come off 5-7% 12 months ago, and they've pretty much recovered that now to be back to where they were before that. So I think we're just going to go through a period of the market settling down, adjusting to the changes that it's faced. But look, I hate to say one way bet, but I have said it now. I think Vancouver is I think Vancouver's a one-way bet, and I think you've got to watch out for, it's a market, so it goes in cycles. So you've got to watch your timing.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the longer term is concerned, we're just going to continue to see this land constricted market with increasing quality of houses being built, high net worth buyers who appreciate that type of product. A very, very healthy marketplace, I must say.
Yeah. Sam, in amongst everything that we've talked about, I mean, we've referred to elements of it, but the quality of life up there is fantastic. I mean, it is one of the world's most beautiful places. In addition to the dynamic of amenities with Whistler and stuff that exist. But
that's right, Gavin. I mean, they say it's one of the few places in the world where, between Whistler and Vancouver, you can ski in the morning, play golf at lunchtime, and sail in the afternoon.
Yeah. No, and that is, that doesn't exist everywhere, and it's and all in beautiful places with just, a gorgeous natural environment around you, which I have had the good fortune to experience up there.
Yeah, I mean, the Pacific Northwest, it's a stunning place.
It is. Sam, just before we close off for today's podcast, are there any, I'd like to ask all of my guests if there are any big predictions that they'd like to make, things that they think will happen that will be very impactful in the markets that we're discussing on the podcast. Is there anything significant or very impactful that you see happening in that market in the next 3 years?
Well, I think, it's interesting. I think there are a couple of things that are going to be certainly going to impact the market here. One is a trend towards more sustainable building techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that is, front and center as far as municipalities in Vancouver are concerned. It's interesting that the buyers are not necessarily demanding it, but the municipalities are certainly imposing it. So we've got this huge sort of focus on lead building standards.
Yes.
And that's only going to continue, and that will continue, and that will continue to increase the cost of construction. So, that's a sort of a bit of an issue that the market's also got to grapple with, where you've got buyers that don't necessarily pay as much attention to that as the municipalities do, and the result is that margins get squeezed. But I think the building industry is getting its head around that. Are finding ways to adapt to the new bylaws that are coming in, and do so without it necessarily having a huge impact on costs. But so that's one thing. And then I think the other major thing that we've got here is just a realization that we have to densify, like in any other city whose economy is growing, and that the ramifications of that. So it's no longer necessary for a family of four to have a 10,000 square foot house. That seemed quite normal. 5-10 years back in the prime markets.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the size of houses coming down, and we're seeing densification, which is showing up in the form of laneway homes and the like. So that's that's a big sort of sea change, if you like, that's coming through the market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, look, Sam, thank you very much. It sounds like, a tremendous future ahead for the market, the Metro Vancouver market and Whistler. It's been very interesting to talk through some of the reasons why. I totally agree with you. Sustainability, not just in Vancouver. It's such a massive factor in the real estate industry everywhere around the world at the moment. And is going to drive a lot of change in what people are buying and living in, as we see developments in technologies that enable better building techniques in that space. And crucially, as I think you mentioned, building techniques that drive affordability too, which I think is a big, important continued change that we need to see around sustainability.
Yeah, no, totally, Gavin. And of course, we couldn't finish this podcast without a mention going to one of the biggest topics in the world today, which is AI. Because this is going to affect all of the things that we just discussed. How buildings are built, how buildings are managed, and it's going to be an absolute game changer, coming through in the next couple of years.
Hopefully, there will still be a need for people like us when all of that happens. But
I can say with absolute confidence, Gavin, that I'm sure that there will be. So I think we need to be obviously looking at what's going on. But I think you and I will have a job for someone to come down.
Well, I think that's a great point, a great note to end on. And Sam Whiffin, Chief Executive Officer of Eaton Square Capital, thank you very much for joining us on PropNext.
Gavin, absolute pleasure. Really great to talk to you.
So that's a wrap. It just leaves it for me now to thank you very much for joining us today on the PropNext podcast. And I hope that you'll be able to tune in again to a future show as the conversations develop. If you'd like to contact me, please drop me a note on gavinrmorgan@propnx.com, or take a look at the website at www.propnex.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and I hope to see you in a future podcast. Goodbye.